Do you think it's stupid that the Alliance is currently ruled by one High King, while the Horde is currently being ruled by like 13 different people from the Volpira to the Draktyr, despite the fact that the guy that actually created a Horde troll is currently the lead character of the saga that just began? Well, that is almost certainly going to change soon as the faction conflict is coming back, as it was stated by Blizzard in a recent interview. Even more importantly, Troll is really just a personification of Chris Metzen. I mean, just like Troll, how he retired, Chris Metzen has also retired and returned completely unexpectedly because, as he said in the cinematic, we don't get to hide. The Horde Council was really just a temporary solution after BFA that will have to be changed with the upcoming threats, and who better to rule the Horde than the guy that actually created the entire faction from nothing. Actually playing WoW on your phone is now possible with Awesome, this video sponsor. It allows you to control your desktop from your phone completely free, which is perfect for checking in on your WoW characters when you're away from the keyboard. It's super easy to use, just click my link in the description, download the PC and the phone app and just connect them. The free version is great as you can control your desktop, but the real deal is the game version with custom keyboards for various games such as WoW with great FPS and sound as well. Make sure to use my code Doran to get 7 days completely free, only for the first 200 people. They also got a smart plug to turn off your PC at any time, as well as hot sales with up to 40% off on Pro and game versions. Check out Awesome. So when you think of the Horde, you really think of Troll. Really, if it wasn't for Troll, almost certainly the Horde would not be a thing. I mean, originally, the Horde was this Burning Legion puppet that came to invade Azeroth, demonic, but Troll formed a superpower from the remnants of this catastrophe. We could really talk about an alternate reality on what would happen if Troll was not a thing, but almost certainly the Orcs would remain within the camps, or they would really turn out to be a local threat like the Ogres all over Azeroth. The Darkspear would probably be wiped out, or almost certainly remain as an insignificant force, and very likely the Tauren or Kalendor would get defeated by the Centaur. In turn, the Forsaken will almost certainly get overwhelmed by the forces of the Alliance in the Eastern Kingdoms, and the whole world of Azeroth would look a whole lot different. The fact that Troll eventually abandoned his post changed everything, and this was really a bit of a weird decision. He decided to help save the world as a shaman, and he felt like he could do more than as the war chief of the Horde, but the fact that he put Garrosh in charge changed everything, and really ultimately led the Horde to multiple civil wars that we can feel up to this day. Still, Troll didn't just turn into a hermit, he had actually returned on multiple occasions. In fact, he was very close to becoming the war chief at the end of both the Siege of Orgrimmar and BFA, and let's be real, if he became war chief after Garrosh was defeated, we would have avoided a whole bunch of problems almost certainly. Now here's the thing, people see Troll in the new cinematic with the grey hair. They had known him since Warcraft 3, it's been nearly 25 years, and they think like he's this ancient character that is like way too old to be a war chief, like he should be retired. However, literally by all accounts, based on the timeline that we know of, he's currently at about 40 years of age, which is literally nothing. He's not even that older than Anduin, as Anduin is in his 20s. He's already retired multiple times and returned, and now, as a lead character for the War Within, he's almost certainly coming back, and I think he might finally realize that he needs to be in charge, as the 2 times he wanted to leave the mantle to someone else, it all just blew up in flames, and every time it was just worse. Now, why I think this is going to be the case is because the faction war is returning, as Blizzard confirmed in an interview, but we'll get to that in a bit. So this is really a bit of a weird scenario. I feel like if you asked random people that play WoW that are like half versed in the lore, I'm not sure they would be able to guess who is currently leading the Horde. I mean, sure, everyone knows that the council is currently in charge, but can people really name every single one of the Horde leaders without looking at the wiki? While for the Alliance, on the other hand, everyone knows about Anduin and Turellian. The Horde Council is a bit weird and definitely an outdated concept at this point where the lore is and where the lore is heading. So you might remember BFA and the ending of this gigantic worldwide Horde versus Alliance conflict that was like the biggest faction conflict ever. It was ultimately a part of the Jailer's plan, of course, but really it all ended up in a truce, and this is something that a lot of people seem to forget. The war never really ended, and Blizzard never entirely properly wrapped it all up. The Alliance had won this war, but based on the cost and everything, they might as well have lost it. Now, the Chronicle Volume 4 book came out that kinda doubled down on this, and it also recapped the previous expansions, and it really said how the entire piece was really just a joke. A lot of people didn't take it seriously, and a lot of them felt the peace, the truce, was a huge injustice. Even the recent information from the War Within beta shows that a bunch of characters still hold resentment and think that the piece shouldn't have turned out the way it did. Now, this leads us to the context of the creation and why the Horde Council was even created in the first place. So, after Sylvanas was essentially a puppet of the jailer, Garrosh failed, Vol'jin ended up being completely useless, they figured out no one in particular should rule the faction and that in fact they should just get a council. However, this should have really just been a temporary solution until the Horde gets back on track, get back on their feet, they figure out a peace treaty, clear all the loose ends, and then someone is going to come in to solidify the leadership as the war chief of the faction. Really, this is very similar to real-world history, how after a major war there would be a temporary form of government until there is some stability to create something concrete. At the time when this was happening, Thrall was actually present. Originally, he wanted nothing to do with this, he felt like he did everything in his power, then he went to Outland, but Varrock Saurfang had been through much more, he was much older than Thrall, and he sought him out, and we got the whole "we don't get to hide" scenario, which ultimately dragged Thrall into the war. However, seeing that this exact same character was slain in a pretty dramatic way by Sylvanas, Thrall said he promised Saurfang he wouldn't become a war chief, and he didn't, of course, and then we got the council. However, keep this in mind, since then, it has been quite a bit of time. First, we got the Shadowlands, we got a 5-year timescape between Shadowlands and Dragonflight, now we're getting a War Within, which is another year or two, so really, it's been between 5 and 10 years since then, and let's really look at the status quo where we are. The Horde is still in this type of a temporary solution, led by a council of like a dozen people when no one can really make a final word type decision, while the Alliance also has a council of sorts, but it is ruled by a High King. Now, this brings us to the upcoming faction conflict I had previously mentioned. So I feel like no one is really talking about this for some reason, and it didn't really turn into big news within the community, but it is actually big news. A few months back, we got an interview with a few lead developers, and they just outright confirmed that a faction war is going to be happening soon. They didn't say we will get BFA or another massive conflict all over Azeroth, but the gist of it is that while some characters will remain friendly, the Horde and the Alliance never really get to have real peace. It always erupts into something, and this time it will be no different. According to this, it is hinted that something will be happening at the end of War Within that is going to be probably similar to another Vradgate type event where something happens between the factions. The entire characters will be friendly. I think it's just an explanation for the cross-faction features as they are a necessity for gameplay reasons. I don't honestly expect a major war, but something where we are fighting the main threat, which is going to be the Void, but we are going to be separate factions with separate bases, and we aren't going to exactly be friendly. I think Blizzard may have figured out that doing everything but just outright merging the factions into one hasn't really been the best thing, as a lot of people still identify with the Horde and the Alliance, and they like the faction pride. The beta itself already started setting this up with multiple dialogues for major characters where they aren't exactly too happy with the other faction and how peace turned out in the past. This probably means that we will get like local wars or skirmishes, and this means that the faction will have to start secluding themselves. Now, think about this. If it really came to blows, the Alliance is really at an unfair advantage with a High King that can make almost all decisions, while the Horde has a council that is ruled by like over a dozen people. It gets even more ridiculous than that, as some races don't even have their own leaders, so the Forsaken are ruled by yet another council, and then this council makes a decision to have one vote on the actual Horde Council. Imagine being in the midst of war and a world-threatening scenario, and you got like 13 different people to agree on one thing. I think this type of a threatening scenario will get the council to vote for a war chief, a war leader that will have to unite the faction and lead it in times of dire need. Now, realistically, can you think of any character better right now to lead the Horde as a war chief than Thrall? He obviously returned from retirement, he's back to saving the world, and he's not just trying to live a peaceful life like he was in the past. He was in the opening cinematic of the World Soul Saga, he obviously was seeking out Anduin, who was also trying to have some alone time to essentially remind him that we don't get to hide and that Azeroth needs us. Also, there is an entire scenario with him losing his elemental powers, and we don't really know if it returns, but it is possible that instead of being a shaman, he's going to actually focus on being a war chief. However, This is all in-game lore. I feel like the biggest hint for Troll leading is the fact that Chris Metzen has returned as the lead story guy. This isn't exactly speculation. I mean, everyone knows that Troll is really his own reflection in the game, a reflection that he might have taken a bit too far a few times with the entire Green Jesus thing. However, he started retiring Trolls just a few years before he actually retired, which means he was thinking about retiring himself from Blizzard, and he probably never figured out he would return. However, just as he has returned back to lead the company, Troll has also suddenly made a big return as one of the lead characters. Chris Metzen obviously said he was back for good, and he's the one that is working on all the 3 expansions, so I honestly feel like Troll returning back to lead the Horde would be like a personification of Chris returning to lead Blizzard and how he doesn't get to hide. He kinda created Warcraft lore and it got a life of its own, just like how Troll created a Horde, and despite the fact that both of them retired, they always had to come back. Of course, a little bit of speculation on the real world side, however from the gameplay side it definitely makes sense. If it comes to faction war, the Horde will need a leader. I know a lot of people are all about everyone having a vote and they don't want to have a dictator having a single word over the entire faction, but the Alliance doesn't exactly have a dictator. They're ruled by the High King, but they all have a vote of their own, and I just don't think it is possible for the Horde to ever be efficient without a war chief, and who better to rule than the guy that created a faction and was with it through thick and thin. Thank you for watching. Check out the video on Xal'atath getting a new body from Old God Remains of Kazakar by clicking on the screen, and check out my video on ancient training methods on the second channel by clicking on the screen as well. See you next time.